So we all know what's happened to Dior at this point, but I think the greater question is, how did we get here? How does the richest luxury company in the world with huge margins on their products overlook a legal compliance issue over human rights? As much as I love luxury, my full-time passion and daytime job is in sustainability. I've worked in the international climate policy space to develop the Paris Agreement, as well as worked in the fashion sustainability space. So when I look at these kinds of articles, I think it'd be interesting to provide an insider's perspective of what it takes to develop sustainable certifications and standards, as well as what companies have to do to follow them. Now, to be honest, when you look at the price tag of a particular piece of item that Dior or even any LVMH brand carries, I don't think it's to anyone's surprise that they are only $50 to $100. Many of us have watched Tanner Leatherstein at this point, who has deconstructed so many bags. So I don't think it should come to a surprise that the bags themselves, in terms of cost of goods, isn't that expensive to begin with. The main issue here today that we see is the issue of not abiding to legal standards of human worker rights and the issue of exploitation. Based on the articles that we're seeing online, Dior is actually not facing any criminal charges, and it's primarily because Dior is not doing the exploitation directly. According to a Reuters article, Milan prosecutors are investigating the contracting and subcontracting employees for exploiting workers and employing people off the books, while Dior itself is not facing any criminal probes. To understand why such legal liability is dealt in this kind of way, it takes an understanding of not just LVMH's supply chain, but general fashion retailer supply chains in the world. When you look at retailers from fast fashion companies like H&M or Zara up to LVMH, a lot of the companies and brands that you see in stores are primarily retail companies. They work on the conception of their brand, marketing, products, but they themselves rarely manufacture their own products. Think of an iPhone. Apple owns all the information related to how it's designed, what goes into it, patents, but they don't own the manufacturing companies in China that develop the iPhone itself. Now, Dior and many LVMH brands are actually a bit of a hybrid. They're not 100% retail brands. In fact, Dior is a company that owns some of its supply chain. It states in its website that it does at times purchase small workshops to preserve artisan trades. And this isn't something that surprises me. So I've been to the Dior Galleria in Paris, and it's a beautiful place to go. And there they actually have in-house leather artisans who show you how the Lady Dior is made. And all of this is meant to give customers the impression that they really take care of quality consistency and who they hire to ensure that the brand product is luxurious. So while Dior hasn't faced any criminal charges, really only two things could have happened here. One, Dior knows that this is a problem and just doesn't care. Or two, it's a simple oversight. At first glance, when you understand retailers versus suppliers and manufacturers, you might think, well, yeah, maybe there could have been some sort of oversight. However, the relationship between retail brands and contracting companies, manufacturers, is actually closer than you might think. Normally, when you are a big brand company, and this goes for any big brand company, including H&M or Zara, up to an LVMH, people will normally go down to these manufacturing companies to do a site visit and develop relationships with these contracting companies. When you develop a product, especially in the fashion space, relationships are key between manufacturers and the retailer. It's not a simple thing where you go online, you search it up, you call them, and you're like, hey, can you give me 5,000 pieces? There are people who do this, but most of the time in this business space, to ensure that there is consistency of quality, a person will go down to a manufacturing site to help develop relationships and clarify for themselves whether they're meeting certain environmental and human rights standards. There are literally jobs in the fashion world where merchandising people from the retail side will go out throughout the world to find suppliers to meet the demand of the products that they're creating. And the same thing goes for suppliers. Suppliers will also fly out to retailers to go and show what kinds of products they can bring. So it's very difficult to say that a company like Dior, who is very concerned about quality of their brand and their items, would not have enough consistency or comprehensiveness when it comes to these kinds of site visits to their contracting companies. Which brings us the issue of subcontracting. So some people might argue, well, those are just contractors in which Dior has developed a strong relationship with. What about subcontracting? So subcontracting is essentially when a person contracts to a specific company, and that company outsources it once again to another company. Now, the only way you're legally allowed to do this is if there are actual clauses in your contract that allow you to subcontract to begin with. Think of it this way. You've rented an apartment and you want to sublet it out. There are sometimes clauses saying in your rental agreement that you can't sublet. Knowing that there are likely specific clauses and rules and regulations around subcontracting in their agreements, it's very unlikely that Dior doesn't have some sort of standard that subcontracting companies are obliged to follow. Dior is likely to have some sort of involvement in subcontracting itself. There needs to be an understanding of technical know-how to develop such kinds of products, as well as some sort of oversight into how the subcontracting companies are run. In fact, in LVMH's ethics and compliance documents, on its first page, it actually literally states that subcontractors are subject to the same ethics and compliance standards as their contractors, as is the brand itself. But while subcontracting can seem to be a gray area, and retail companies throughout the world, not just LVMH, can cite that they're not in the know, it would be very surprising to me that a company like Dior had no understanding. In fact, if you go to a simple site visit and you say, hey, I want to contract with you to begin with, and yeah, I'll allow subcontracting, you can kind of tell if they will not subcontract or not. If there are 10 leather artisans there and you're going to make 5,000 pieces, you already know from your site visit that this particular company that you're contracting with doesn't have the capacity to fulfill the demand. They look at their margin at the end of the day and they say, I like the price that I'm getting, and how they get the bag to me, how they produce the bag, none of my problem, as long as I've ticked the boxes in my legal documents to say I've done the site visit, I have done this, I have done this, that's legally required, and I'm done. So I think the greater question from all of this and understanding subcontracting, contracting, manufacturing as a whole, or what are the implications of big fashion houses like Dior not doing anything? So the items that you receive when you go to a boutique itself will probably be just not as good as they were before. It's no surprise that this is the case when human labor is being exploited, but there's another larger problem that comes to this, and it's actually economic. Because there are essentially a black market for creating of these bags, people will inevitably choose the cheaper option over the option where a company is following all the standards but will have a higher cost to the bag that they're selling to Dior. And so this creates unfair competition between companies that do abide by the law and those that don't. And knowing that many of Dior's bags are produced in Italy, it diminishes the made in Italy standard, as well as many artisans who live there and their well-being. It's essentially a race to the bottom kind of mentality. A study by Bain actually estimated that Italy accounts for 50 to 55% of global luxury goods production. So Italy itself has a major stake in eradicating human rights abuses and providing ethically sourced products to the global luxury market. And the last thing, which I think probably irks a lot of people, is that when you're buying this kind of product, people have always told you that if you were to buy a fake product, it would be exploiting human labor. This is going to fund the black market in some sort of sense. And then now when you looked at these two things side by side, you wonder, is there any difference at all? So I think it's very disingenuous what Dior is doing to its customers, as well as what it's doing to its employees. And for all legal purposes, they're not technically employees, they're contractors. So I think the question is, knowing all this and the implications, where does Dior go from here? So from an article, it seems that Dior is hoping to reduce reputational risk by actually reducing the number of subcontractors and to internalize productions. Beyond Dior and beyond LVMH, another thing that needs to be really looked at is certification standards and legal procedures. How does a company like LVMH receive like the gold standard in CDB disclosures, which is essentially a sort of sustainability and human rights disclosure and certification? And how does Dior manage to get a butterfly disclosure, which is essentially a certification for luxury goods? How are they able to get all these kinds of certifications when in reality they're doing this kind of exploitation of work in their contracts? Certifications are a means for companies to show that they have met certain kinds of standards. But what if the standard itself is not trustworthy? I think these kinds of certifications need to be relooked, either in the standard itself or the way in which they're checking the standard. And this probably goes the same for the legal procedures. It's great that Milan prosecutors are doing this, but I think the greater question is, how can so many illegal manufacturing shops in Italy pop up in the first place? Should there be more crackdowns on these companies before they're able to get a license to even produce leather goods. There are also lots of great standards that Dior and LVMH can follow from other companies. So if you look like a company like Patagonia, they actually work with many of their suppliers to ensure that they finally are able to reach the standard they want. So rather than saying like, okay, if you can't meet this, I won't work with you anymore, they actually invest in their supply chain. They invest in their manufacturers, saying like, we know you can do it. Here's how you can get there. Let me put a little bit of money into this so that you can reach the standard that you're meant to achieve. To be very honest with you all, in the history of sustainability and ESG, human rights is actually the bare minimum. This is a really, really old issue that really shouldn't be happening anymore, given that we've had so many social movements and legal legislation to ensure that this doesn't happen. We're not even asking Dior to help buy new machinery for these companies, which is something that Patagonia does, or help them develop better ways of producing a particular kind of product in a more sustainable way. That requires a lot of investment in R&D. This is simply making sure people get paid. That's just a simple, hey, instead of $57, I'll pay you $200 per bag. It's not that hard. And the second thing is to ensure that the money is going to the workers. Doing constant site visits, and France and Italy is a very short flight. So to me, in all, when I look at this, it's actually really on Dior at this point. How could a company as great as them, as concerned about reputation as a luxury brand could be, not care about their supply chain? People will call it an oversight, but to me, I just see it as a deliberate choice to look away from the exploitation that they probably know happened. But what do you guys think? Is this impacting the way you're buying products? Will you be not buying Dior altogether? Or are you giving them the opportunity to fix their mistake? So yeah, I hope this video was helpful to you to help understand a little bit about the fashion world. If you like this video, I hope you can give it a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!